Welcome to the PCN Capitol Preview. I'm Francine Schertzer. Today we'll talk about the governor's energy plan. But first, we're joined by Abigail Hakis, staff reporter for Next Generation Newsroom. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning.
You wrote that the Pennsylvania Lottery wants to change the rules to allow for greater payouts in more lottery games. Why does the lottery believe that consumer demand is changing?
Well, the lottery is seeing an increased interest in those $30 and $50 scratch-off tickets, and those are the higher cost, higher payout games. The $50 scratch-off tickets have up to $5 million in payout prizes. And even though scratch-off sales have been declining a little bit, the shift has been towards those higher payout, higher cost scratch-offs. So the percentage of sales is going to those higher cost tickets.
As a reminder for viewers, what kind of services are provided through the lottery revenues?
So the lottery revenue benefits programs for senior citizens. So there's a wide array, but think free and reduced public transportation fares, low-cost prescriptions, and property tax and rent rebates.
What kind of price to profit ratio does the lottery currently need to abide by?
Currently, the lottery is required to make a 20% profit on their traditional games. So that's not including the iLottery.
Are there risks to changing that ratio as the lottery is asking for?
Well, the lottery's argument is that historically that profit margin requirement has dropped over the years, so it's been as high as 30%. And they argue that despite that, they're seeing generally record-breaking profits. But there is a concern, of course, I think naturally built into this conversation, that decreasing the profit requirement means a decrease in profits.
Would changing that price-to-profit ratio impact a consumer's likelihood of actually winning a prize?
It would not. They're exactly as likely to win on any given ticket, even if the lottery changes this requirement. The only thing that changes is the lottery will be able to sell more of those higher cost, higher payout scratch-offs or other traditional games.
How are lawmakers responding to the Pennsylvania Lottery's proposal to eliminate this profit margin?
Well, Governor Josh Shapiro has suggested this in his annual 2025 to 2026 budget proposal, but currently we're still waiting to see how the General Assembly will respond. But throughout history, the General Assembly has proposed and enacted changes to this requirement. So as I mentioned earlier, that 30% has dropped over the years. And as recently as 2022, the legislature approved an extension of that 20% requirement for another 5 years. So in 2029, it will actually shift back to a 25% profit margin that existed prior to the 20%.
Would making this proposed change have any impact on the prevalence of gambling in Pennsylvania? Has that been a concern?
Well, some gambling advocates or responsible gaming advocates are concerned that it could increase the number of cases of gambling-related harm. So there have been about 4% of calls to the statewide helpline for gambling come from people who say that the lottery is their most problematic form of gambling. So some people are concerned that this will increase gambling-related harms just the way that any increase in gambling would increase gambling-related harms.
Do other states that have eliminated their profit margin ratio, how does this work for them and their profitability?
Well, generally, the Pennsylvania Lottery is arguing that this will not impact profits in the same way that over the years, despite their decrease in the profit margin requirement, that it hasn't actually decreased their profits. And we're only one of 7 states that has a profit margin requirement. And in their annual profit reports, the Pennsylvania breaks that down. Essentially, they're arguing that there's only one other state that has a profit margin requirement that makes more annually than Pennsylvania.
Have you gotten any sense of if or how quickly this issue might move through the legislature?
That's a great question. I think even the lottery is kind of wondering that right now. I asked their press secretary, and essentially her response was, we don't yet know how quickly this change will happen, but I think it's something they're hoping for soon.
Abigail Hakis, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you so much for having me.
More of the PCN Capitol Preview after this short break.
Support PCN and the programming you love by texting PCN TV to 877-907-9770. With your generous donation, PCN will continue to share everything Pennsylvania with you and your neighbors. Please consider donating today. PCN is everything Pennsylvania. PCN proudly brings you coverage of the Pennsylvania State Legislature. We bring you the State House and Senate floor proceedings as they happen, unedited and complete. Our mission includes committee meetings, budget hearings, interviews with prominent legislators, and other public policy forums. PCN is your destination for the best in Pennsylvania legislative coverage on cable and PCN Select. PCN is Pennsylvania politics and policy.
Welcome back. Our guests today are the chairs of the House Energy Committee, Representative Martin Causer and Representative Elizabeth Fiedler. Last week, Governor Josh Shapiro announced that Democratic lawmakers would soon introduce bills to advance his lightning plan for energy. What would the governor's proposal do to address energy cost and availability? Representative Fiedler, we'll start with you, please.
Sure. The governor's proposal, the lightning plan, really is an attempt to speak directly to consumers and to say, we hear your concerns about rising utility bills that are already going up, bills that everyone anticipates will continue to go up in the coming months and years. And we have a plan. We want to have an above all energy portfolio and all of the above energy portfolio that includes all sources of energy, making sure that we are, the Commonwealth obviously is a great producer of energy. We could produce even more. And the governor's plan is really a 6-part bill package to ensure that consumers and their needs are at the forefront. And of course, when we say consumers, we mean our constituents, the people we serve back home. And so I think that the governor's lightning plan is really a forward-looking plan that incorporates many sources of energy and that recognizes that we are all very reliant on energy. I mean, whether it's this video that we're doing right now or, video chats people do with their families, certainly all sorts of online banking. I mean, it seems at every turn there's a new thing that people are expected to be able to do online, and some of it is very, very energy intensive. And so I think it's really a recognition of where we're at this time in 2025, in which people are very reliant on the internet for very basic parts of their life. And it's a recognition that Pennsylvanians need affordable and reliable energy. We need to know that the grid is there. When we flip the light switch or we go home to open the refrigerator door, we need to know that the power is on. And that's certainly true at home, but it's also true, when we talk about hospitals, educational and research institutions. We need to ensure that everybody has the power that they need for years to come. And I think the governor's lightning plan really, like I said, is a 6-part attempt, really a comprehensive attempt to address our energy needs right now and to look forward to the future.
Representative Causer, what's your view on the impact of the governor's proposal?
Pennsylvania is an energy powerhouse, and I've said this repeatedly. We export so much energy, and we are a leader in energy production. Unfortunately, poor policy over the last few years has restricted our ability to maximize energy production, and we actually have a situation now where our grid is not as stable as it should be. We're not producing as much energy as we could be, and I think that going forward, we need policy decisions to be made in the Capitol building that actually promote energy production, and we need to move away from these poor energy policies, such as RGGI, for example. RGGI's been around a few years. And even the threat of RGGI has caused energy production to move out of this state and to move to other states. We often hear the governor say that he hates to lose to other states, but RGGI itself is causing us to lose out on power plants that could be built, for example, in this state. So we need energy policy that actually gets government out of the way and actually promotes energy production. Getting rid of RGGI is the absolute first start. And, the governor's plan has a lot of acronyms, and I don't focus on the acronyms because a lot of that is public relations. We need policies that promote energy production, that streamline the process so that we can get power plants built in this state. We have abundant natural gas in this state. We have the resources. We have the workforce. We have the ability to be building power plants all across the state. Well, guess what? How many power plants are being built right now in Pennsylvania? Zero. And why is that? It's because of poor energy policy. And that's why I have significant concerns with parts of the governor's energy policy proposal.
Representative Causer, if I might go back on something you just said, you'd mentioned that the threat of a policy such as the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative makes some energy companies leave the state. If the resources are based here in Pennsylvania, how do they leave Pennsylvania?
Well, the threat of an energy tax is one that is significant for energy companies. They're not going to invest in a state where there is a significant tax threat. And just the burden that would place on companies, they're going to go invest their millions and billions of dollars in other states that are willing to work with these energy companies to quickly build power plants. And that's why here in Pennsylvania, we need to be focused on that. We have the resources here. Let's go across the state and build power plants and not threaten companies with cap and tax plans like Reggie or the governor's in-state plan that he's proposing here. Let's build these power plants and let's put Pennsylvanians to work and let's strengthen the grid across Pennsylvania.
Representative Fiedler, the governor's plan includes a cap on carbon emissions for power plants. What is the goal of placing these carbon emissions caps?
Sure, and I'm glad to go to that. I do want to respond just on the Reggie front, because I know that is, as Chair Causer said, there's many acronyms. Of all the acronyms, I think Reggie might be the one that's most commonly heard in the halls of the Capitol these days. And it certainly came up quite a bit during the House Appropriations hearings, during DEP, DCNR, a number of different agencies, talking about the impact of Reggie. And even, if we're not in it, what, is there an actual impact for Pennsylvanians? And over, the message from the officials of these departments, from the experts in the field, has been that it is not the main deciding factor for companies when they're determining where to locate. That the possibility of Pennsylvania's presence in Reggie, and that this is a matter for the courts to decide. I mean, it still is very much a question mark what's going to happen with it. So I just think it feels important to me to push back on that, because there's so many other factors that are at play. Whether we're talking about a highly trained workforce, which we have in Pennsylvania and we continue to build on, whether we're talking about speed of permitting and making it possible for companies to get up and running quickly, certainly considering public health and environmental concerns, but to get up and running and get the permits that they need. These are all things that the administration has worked on, and certainly as House Democrats we've worked on. So I just think, the fingers constantly being pointed at Reggie as the reason that something has not happened. I think we heard over and over during House Appropriations hearings and elsewhere that is not the main factor for a lot of these companies. That is not what they're thinking about. They're thinking about the availability of resources, workforce training, and permitting and siting. And so, I think the presence of many of those pieces in the governor's lightning plan is really a recognition of the need to bring those companies here and to help them grow. So I just wanted to put that in there, because I do know that Reggie, as I said, is something that we talk a lot about here in the Capitol that might be less familiar to people back home, but certainly, a lot of fingers are pointed at it as the main reason that something does or doesn't happen. And I just think it's much more complex than that when a major energy company is trying to decide, any major company is trying to decide where to locate and to open up business.
Like to talk a little bit more about Reggie too myself. I think that along with Chair Fiedler, there's definitely a lot of things that enter into the equation, but I do think that Reggie is very significant. Companies are making calculated decisions on where to provide their investment. And if a state has a policy or even the threat of a policy like Reggie that would cap and tax carbon emissions, that is going to factor into their equation. And there's no question that Reggie or the threat of RGGI has had an impact, because we can see that companies are investing in other states. Just for what I just said about power plant investments. If you're looking at Ohio, for example, or Pennsylvania, and you're going to invest, you're going to go to a state where you're not going to have to deal with a tax should it be enacted through RGGI. So that is an important factor in these decisions. Of course, there are other factors like permitting, for example, as Chair Fiedler just mentioned. We have a serious permitting problem in this state. We can't get power plants built because of how slow our permitting process is. All of those things, permitting, the bureaucracy they have to deal with, the tax structure they have to deal with, all of those come into play. And I think as a state government, we need to streamline that process so that we can actually have investment in this state. And I think that all those factors together need to be considered.
Since you both brought up the issue of permitting, Governor Shapiro is proposing establishing the Reliable Energy Sitting and Electric Transition Board, also called RESET, to speed up the permitting process. Could you talk a little bit more about the role that permitting plays and how this board would be composed?
Absolutely. And this is actually, of all the different parts of the plan, this is candidly the one that caught my attention right from the beginning, because I do think that it is a tremendous challenge that our state faces, especially if we're talking about trying to bring in more companies. We're trying to expand our energy portfolio. And it really recognizes the challenges that many local municipalities face when it comes to some of these tremendously large energy projects coming into their neighborhood. Very grateful to local elected officials and folks who serve in local and municipal government who do, I think, incredibly important work. They also have to deal with a lot of different topics, and they know what they're getting into. But I think when we're talking about very large energy projects, the RESET board is really a recognition that local municipalities need and deserve support from the Commonwealth. And we need to have a plan, a comprehensive plan as to how we're going to incorporate some of these major energy producers into neighborhoods, into different corners of the state. So I think, the support that the RESET board provides in helping to facilitate these energy projects and to make sure that not all of the burden falls on local elected officials, while also trying to expedite the process and make sure that we can get some of these energy companies up and running as quickly and safely as possible. I think it hits on all the notes for me when we talk about trying to increase our energy production in Pennsylvania. And I'm really excited for us to have the chance to tackle it and to hopefully try to work together to make this concept that I think is at its core really, really good, try to make it even better, and try to make sure that it is a good fit for every corner of the state, because we know that projects in Pennsylvania differ, from urban, rural, suburban locations. And so I think the RESET board is a really smart way to look at energy policy really comprehensively. And it also recognizes that many other states already have a board like this. It's something we can build out within our state infrastructure to help the government run more efficiently, to help companies be able to get the permitting and siting that they need, and make sure that the voices of local municipalities and constituents are heard as well.
What's currently responsible for holding up the permitting process currently?
Is that for me or for Chair Causer?
For either of you. What takes so long for the process to move forward?
Chair, you could go first if you'd like, since I just went. I'd be glad to respond.
Well, I'd like to talk a little bit about the RESET board, and I'm actually very interested. I'm actually very interested in this concept, because anything that we can do to streamline the process to actually move these projects forward, I think is valuable. I haven't seen all the details yet for the RESET board. I mean, all of the governor's proposals have been proposed with co-sponsor memos with broad information. We've had some discussion in appropriations committee hearings about them, but quite honestly, the actual drafts of the bills are not available yet. So I'm interested in the details of what the governor's proposing, but the concept of a reset board, a one-stop shop that you could go to streamline the process, work with local officials, and move a project forward is interesting to me, and something that I think potentially could gain bipartisan support if it works properly, if it works with all sources of energy and doesn't lean in certain directions with only certain forms of energy and certain projects. So I'm looking forward to more information on this reset board. And as I said, it could be an opportunity for us to work in a bipartisan manner to really move projects forward.
Under this proposal, would local governments as well as general public have an opportunity to comment and provide input on a proposal?
As Chair Causer said, I think we are still both eagerly awaiting the final language and the chance to dig in a little bit further. But my understanding certainly is that local elected officials, their rights and their voices, as well as local constituents, would, absolutely be respected as part of this board. And that there really is a recognition that we can't have a one-size-fits-all approach to any sort of project in locations that are very different across the Commonwealth. So my expectation, and certainly would be very important to me as an individual, as a homeowner, as a mom, and as a lawmaker, to make sure that local elected officials and local residents have a say in the process and a chance to give feedback as well.
I do think the devil is always in the details, and it certainly is with every bill that we consider. So it has to be a true board that focuses on all energy projects. Of course, public and local official input is critical. That's critical no matter what project you're moving forward. But the details matter, and I haven't seen any details, and so I do think it's a concept worth pursuing. But the details are going to matter.
Let's move on and talk about another aspect of the governor's proposal. This one is referred to by the acronym PRESS, the Pennsylvania Reliable Energy Sustainability Standard, which would further expand the alternative energy portfolio standards, requiring power plants to include a greater percentage of alternative energy sources. Representative Fiedler, we'll start with you, but I'd love both of you to comment to speak to the cost and the reliability of alternative energy compared to traditional fossil fuels and how that would work.
Of course, I'm glad to. So we know, as I think Chair Causer and I both said, that Pennsylvania is already a tremendous producer of energy. That is part of our Commonwealth's legacy. And many people have worked in that industry, and many communities have been supported through energy production. I think renewables really just offers a chance for us to grow even more. And every survey, year after year after year, Pennsylvania is lagging in terms of the production that we could do from these renewable energy sources. That does not mean, to be clear, ending or removing other sources of energy necessarily. It means adding to the energy portfolio that we had. Going back to the beginning, talking about how we're also reliant on energy, on video calls, all sorts of things like that. Like, our need for energy, our energy consumption needs are only growing here in Pennsylvania, but also, across the United States and the world. And so I think growing renewables in Pennsylvania makes sense, because it is I worked on a bill called Solar for Schools that assists local school districts in putting up solar panels. And they're able to harness the sun's energy and create free electricity from it. And then save millions of dollars. To me, it just feels like a no-brainer. Why wouldn't we capture Pennsylvania's natural resources in that same way that we have been with many other sources, and use it to produce energy, whether we're talking about residential homeowners, school districts, municipalities? It just seems to me like a smart way to make sure we're maximizing the energy that we can produce. And I think that's what the legislation does. It seeks to make that process easier and recognizes that for Pennsylvania to have affordable and stable energy for years to come, this absolutely has to be part of it.
Representative Causer?
Let's be clear about what PRESS actually is. PRESS, and it's another acronym. There's a lot of acronyms around this building, but what PRESS is a significant change to the alternative energy portfolio standard. And what that is a mandate for electric generation providers, electric companies, to secure their electricity from certain sources. So it's a mandate that they have to get electricity from certain sources that government has decided where they have to get it from. The ultimate impact of the alternative energy portfolio standards is to raise the cost of energy. If you're mandating that electric companies have to get their energy from certain sources, then what that does is raise the cost of energy. And at a time when energy is going up significantly and our grid is very much less stable than what it should be, I don't think we should be forcing electric companies to purchase electricity from certain sources. I think that we need an all of the above strategy, and that we need to be generating electricity from multiple sources, not placing burdensome mandates that are going to ultimately raise the cost of energy. So this proposal to change the alternative energy portfolio standard to mandate a certain amount of renewables way above where we're at right now, I think is moving us in the wrong direction.
Representative Fiedler, would you like to respond?
Current standards are out of step with the current year, which is 2025. And so I think one of our goals, and in fact, one of our obligations as lawmakers, is to look not just at new legislation we can create, but at current standards and ongoing legislation, and find ways that we can modernize it. And so I think that's what this is, an attempt to recognize that the energy portfolio and the technology that we have in 2025 is very different from what existed 5, 10, 20 years ago. And so it's an attempt to bring in some of those energy sources and to amplify them, with the goal of creating more reliable energy and lower energy prices for people back home, which for me, I know is a main goal in everything that we do. We've Chair Cosner and I have worked well together on the committee, and I know that thinking about folks back home and their energy prices is a common goal that we have. And so we might disagree on this piece, but I do think that it's key to making sure that we take care of people back home and keep their energy prices low.
Representative Cosner, if I may.
One other point I'd like to make is, when you look at all the projects that have been proposed to PJM, and that's the regional grid operator, about 95% of the pending projects that are in the queue for PJM are either solar or renewable projects. 95%. So why do we need a mandate? If these projects are already moving forward now, why do we need to mandate that electric companies use certain sources like solar and renewable when those projects are being proposed already? So I think a mandate like this takes us in the wrong direction, and we need a more holistic approach where we can be moving forward with multiple projects where we don't need government intervention to mandate things like renewables.
Representative Cosner, if I can come back to you for a moment. If the push for greater alternative energy on the grid moves forward, what happens to electric supply companies that can't meet the clean energy standards?
Well, the problem with the mandate is they have to meet the standard, whatever the policy decision is. So the ultimate impact is they're going to have to meet the whatever the law requires, and that's going to drive up the cost of energy. That is the ultimate end result. Government mandates like this cause increased prices. We already know the grid is not as stable as it should be. We know that we can improve that situation by increasing electricity generation, and mandates like AEPS take us in the wrong direction.
Is there a difference in the stability of energy, the traditional fossil fuels that we are used to from decades past, compared to the alternative sources that are being perhaps newly considered?
I absolutely believe that there is a difference, because many of our traditional sources are what you would consider base load energy projects. Sources like coal plants and natural gas power plants are energy generation plants that produce huge amounts of electricity, are very dependable, and we can depend on that energy source being here with us when we need it. Other sources like solar and wind are much less reliable. And I think we need to focus on our traditional energy sources so that we know that when we flip the switch on, our electricity is going to work.
If I may, it is odd to me that we would pass up something like growing renewable energy, like that opportunity that we know exists in Pennsylvania. Technology, when it comes to certainly, for example, solar panels, has improved greatly over the decades. But just generally speaking, like, why it does not make sense to me why, as lawmakers, we would pass up the chance to harness this free energy that exists out there, whether we're talking about wind or solar. We're not talking here necessarily about replacing one thing with another one. We're talking about expanding our portfolio and making sure, as the chair said, that we have increased reliability. I don't think the grid's reliability it's certainly not where I want it to be. I don't think it's where most of us would like it to be. But that feels important to me to point out because, whether I'm driving through Philadelphia or more rural parts of the state, I see people have solar panels out there. I see that people, I think that many constituents recognize this as a valuable source of energy and something that's allowing them, in many cases, to be more independent and more free because they're able to generate their own electricity. They're not reliant on fluctuating energy prices that lately are only fluctuating, going up. So it just, to me, when we talk about energy independence, seems really important to point out that we do have a great source of additional energy here in Pennsylvania, and that's, this whole field of renewables, and why we would pass up the chance to expand that. And instead, the old Harrisburg saying of picking winners and losers, to me, is just, it doesn't make sense when we go back to consumers, because it's beneficial to them. And so it's something that I feel we should absolutely be working on.
We'll continue our discussion on energy policy in just a moment. If I may, we're going to take a very brief break, and we'll continue our discussion in just a moment while we look at what's coming up on PCN. Tomorrow on the PCN Capitol Preview, we'll take a look at the State House legislative agenda with Majority Leader Matt Bradford and Minority Leader Jesse Topper. They join us Tuesday morning live at 9 a.m. The Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission presents their annual report at a meeting before the House Game and Fisheries Committee. That's on Wednesday, live at 9 a.m. On the issues has Senator Lisa Boscola on the subject of utility shutoff law on Wednesday at 7 o'clock. And then right after that, Michael Keurig from the Pennsylvania Farm Bureau talks about policy that could benefit farmers and rural communities. He's here Wednesday at 7:30. Human Resources will be the subject of a conference hosted by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. We'll have that for you Thursday morning at 10. On Journalist Roundtable this week, we're joined by Kristen Smith of the Center Square, John Cole with the Pennsylvania Capital Star, and Linda Stein of the Delaware Valley Journal. That's Thursday at 7 p.m. The public affairs coverage you watch on PCN TV is now free of charge online. Go to PCNTV.com and check out our streaming service, PCN Select. PCN is Everything Pennsylvania. We're a 501c3 nonprofit television network that relies on viewers like you. To make a donation, visit PCNTV.com. Let's get back into our discussion. Representative Causer, let's come back to you. I know you wanted an opportunity to respond to Representative Fiedler.
I think that the AEPS is truly picking winners and losers, and that is the problem. We need an all-of-the-above energy strategy that supports the development of all energy sources, both traditional and renewable. I actually don't have a problem with solar, but I don't think that government should be mandating solar, and I don't think the taxpayers should be subsidizing solar, for example. And if someone wants to put solar panels on their house, I'm fine with that, but I should not be asked to pay for that. And other ratepayers should not be asked to pay for that. So an all of the above energy strategy provides an opportunity for multiple sources of energy. But we do also have to be realistic in the fact that government mandates, anytime the government decides what source of energy is preferred, the cost is going to go up. And that cost is going to be paid for by someone.
The House Energy Committee has been newly established this year. Representative Fiedler, we'll start with you. What do you hope to accomplish through this committee?
Sure. I hope that we are able to work in a bipartisan manner on the Energy Committee to make bills better. I would like us to be a committee that is well known for being very thoughtful, for trying to, as I said, work on a bipartisan front and trying to improve legislation that comes to our committee and ideally to vote it out with bipartisan support and get it to the floor. I think that being a chair of this committee is a tremendous opportunity to do just that. Will take a lot of hard work, I know, in the months and years to come for us to be able to accomplish that goal, which is, I think, a relatively simple goal, but certainly an ambitious one, given the times that we're in and the relatively the fact that the topic of energy is not an easy one, I guess I would say, that there are many opinions about it. I was going to say it's controversial. I don't know if it's quite controversial, but respectfully, there are many different opinions. And yeah, I would like us to be able to find a way to ideally lower prices for people back home and to make the grid more reliable, and to do so in a bipartisan way that recognizes that the district that I represent in South Philadelphia is not the same as the district that Chair Causer represents. They are, in fact, very different places, but all the people back home in both of our districts would like to make sure the lights can turn on now and tomorrow and next year. And I think that, if we continue to focus on that consumer front and that consumer angle, I'm hopeful that we can get things done. I did want to mention, because Chair Causer brought up PJM, I was impressed that we made it till almost 9:30 without the acronym PJM. So that was pretty good. I do think that the backlog of projects at PJM is really important to point out, because it is part of the reason that we are seeing such really frightening, honestly, predictions about energy prices and why we find ourselves in this predicament. And I thought that the governor's stance when it came to the lawsuit with PJM and really making clear that consumers and prices have to be at the heart of these decisions, and we can't have, runaway decision making without that, was really important to me, because the backlog of projects, as Chair Causer mentioned, at PJM is part of the reason that we're facing this challenge. And so I'm hoping that in addition to resolving the backlog at PJM and some of these permitting reforms, hopefully citing, we can make some progress in the committee on this issue.
Representative Causer, what do you hope to accomplish through your chairmanship?
I'm certainly very glad to be working with Chairwoman Fiedler on this committee. It's, energy is one of the most critical issues that we face, because everything is connected to energy. And so these are complex issues, but these are very important issues because they're important to every single Pennsylvanian. Every community relies on energy to power their homes and businesses. And so I'm very glad to be working with Chair Fiedler and my colleagues to support energy policy that, number one, makes sure the lights come on when we flip the switch. Also to strengthen the grid, because I'm very concerned that the grid is much more unstable than what people realize. And also to bring down the cost of energy, because that's critical to every part of our lives. People across the state are struggling. I know in my district, folks are struggling with the cost of energy. I know they're struggling across the state. We often talk about economic development. Well, the key piece of economic development is energy production, because energy production is critical to every aspect of our lives. And so that's why it's a top focus for me. I know it's a top focus for my colleagues. And to have sound energy policy, and one that focuses on strengthening the grid and bringing down the cost of energy, is my focus. And I hope that we can work in a bipartisan manner on that, because I think that's what's best for our constituents. But I also know there's going to be disagreements. I've worked on energy policy in this building for 23 years, and I've seen those disagreements. And so my focus is on areas where we can agree and move forward with those, because I think ultimately that's going to make things better here in the Commonwealth.
On a federal standpoint, last week, the head of the EPA announced the rollback of various environmental initiatives, including rules on climate change. What impact will that have here in Pennsylvania, both on the environment as well as on consumers?
I think we're still really waiting. I think it's a great question. I think when it comes to guidance from the feds, whether it's on specific funding streams or on departments or programming or staffing, we're still trying to figure out a lot. I was really glad to see a few weeks ago the governor announced that a huge amount of funding that was intended for Pennsylvania had been unfrozen and would in fact come to the Commonwealth from DC. That to me was a hopeful sign. I think things are going to continue to change in the weeks and months and years to come. As Chair Causer said, I think our goal really, I see it as working in a bipartisan manner on the issues that we have control over here in Pennsylvania. And so I think it's a big question mark. I am hopeful that we will be able to continue to do really critical things here in Pennsylvania, in many cases which are relying on federal funding, protecting clean air, clean water, public health. That to me all is, it should not be a partisan issue. It should not be a geographic issue. It should be a certainty, regardless of where you live here in Pennsylvania, that those things will be priorities. So as far as I know, I think we're still waiting to see how a lot of that federal stuff shakes out here in Pennsylvania.
I think we finally have an administration in Washington, D.C. that's focused on energy production. And I was certainly glad to see the measures that the Trump administration is taking, because part of what we're dealing with is burdensome regulations and burdensome policy. And I think the Trump administration realizes that we need to roll back many of those burdensome regulations to really focus on energy production. And so I think we're going to see some really great moves in Washington, D.C., and I think that's going to help us as a state. And so I'm excited about what that will entail for our state. I also wanted to get back to the PJM question that Chair Fiedler had mentioned, because, we talk about the backlog of their projects, the increased cost. The real impact there is the governor's settlement with PJM is just a temporary move. The real problem is poor energy policy. If we had energy policy in the entire PJM region that would actually promote energy production, we could bring down the cost and make things much more secure. For example, what we're seeing in Maryland. In Maryland, they're taking off power plants off the grid and then wondering why their grid is not as stable as it should be. It's not a secret. If you continue to take power plants offline, you're going to have less electricity to work from, and that takes you in the wrong direction. It has an impact on Pennsylvania also. I don't want to see Pennsylvanians have to deal with higher costs because of poor policy decisions in other states. Let's focus on energy production throughout the whole region. Let's make energy policy in Pennsylvania that focuses on an all of the above strategy and bringing down the cost of energy and making it more secure.
If I may, I just wanted to respond to the comment about burdensome regulations respectfully. I feel like words like that, burdensome regulations, have been used in the past to try to criticize and try to defeat, not necessarily in our committee per se, but going back for many decades, try to defeat protections for workers, to make sure workers in the energy field have safe working conditions, to make sure that residents who live near major energy projects have clean water and clean air. Regulations can be helpful sometimes to make sure that both the workers on the job and the people near energy projects are safe, and to ensure that basic public health standards are upheld for both of those groups. And so I think, there is a time for regulations. And I do think one of our jobs as lawmakers, as I said, is looking at things that are already on the books and trying to determine whether we should keep them or whether there are changes we should make to them. And I think that's a good example of some of the things that we have already done with permitting reform, and more that I hope we will continue to do.
I'd like to talk briefly about some of the work within the committee. Representative Fiedler, you talked earlier about, you referenced solar for schools. The committee also held a hearing recently about solar for all. Can you talk about these two projects and what they accomplish?
I would be glad to. Solar for Schools is a bill that we got through last session with a $25 million appropriation. It's a bill that I am personally tremendously proud of. I had the chance to travel around the Commonwealth with many of my colleagues, both sides of the aisle, both chambers, talking about it. And as I said earlier, Solar for Schools is really a piece of legislation that helps school districts and community colleges and intermediate units across PA put up solar panels. They could put them on the roof of their building, put it on land next to their building if they have that, and then they're able to generate their own electricity. And that gives them the freedom, the independence, and the budget predictability to know how much energy they're going to be producing and to be able to save millions and millions of dollars over the life of these solar panels. So we've had some really forward-thinking school districts across the Commonwealth already put up panels, and I think they are great examples of what is possible. I got to go to the Johnstown CTC. We've been to Steelton High Spire, all across the Commonwealth. There are these examples, and we are hopeful that through the Solar for Schools program and the first round of grants that will be announced in May, we'll be able to increase that and really help local municipalities. I mean, we know that property taxes are rightfully a very hot topic, a very big issue for a lot of people. And this will give local governments the ability to provide some tax relief to local taxpayers. So that's Solar for Schools. I could talk about that for a whole show, but I'll end it there. And then I'll just say on Solar for All, which we are about to consider in our committee, Solar for All relies on $156 million of federal money coming to Pennsylvania to help low-income residents all across the Commonwealth install solar at their homes. So it's a residential solar program for low-income homeowners. It is federal money. It does not rely on state dollars at all. We simply, as a legislature, need to accept these dollars procedurally, and that's it. I don't see why it would make any sense for us to hand back $156 million of Pennsylvania tax dollars, right? We pay federal taxes. This is money we've sent to DC. This is an attempt to recapture some of that money, to bring it back to our Commonwealth. And we hopefully will be able to do that this session so that we can get this program up and running and help homeowners save money. Yet again, that's what it comes back to.
Representative Cosner, before we run out of time, you alongside with the policy committee had recently held a hearing aimed at energy taxes. Can you talk a little bit about the concerns that you heard the most and what kind of feedback you heard from testifiers?
I received a lot of feedback, mainly on the impacts of poor energy policy, and one being proposals to enact additional energy taxes. That has a huge impact. We talked briefly about the burden of regulations. I don't argue that there has to be some regulations, but they have to be reasonable and responsible and certainly protect our workers in the Commonwealth. But I can give you multiple examples of burdensome regulations that has actually stymied development in the Commonwealth. So the burden of energy taxation, the burden of overregulation has a significant impact. And focusing on building our economy and strengthening our grid have to be top priorities, because that's what's going to make our Commonwealth successful. And ultimately making sure that we're not wasting taxpayer dollars. And that's a top priority for me.
As legislative session continues and the budget process moves forward, can you look at the governor's energy proposals in particular and pick out areas that you see place for compromise compared to what policies will be a little bit tougher to get through the House?
Well, like I said, we're still evaluating because none of these bills have been introduced, so the devil's in the details. But I do think that there are areas that are very concerning, such as the AEPS change, such as the governor's state energy tax. Those are very concerning. But there are other areas that there may be room for compromise, such as the reset board that we just spoke about, and also the rework of the tax credit program, the tax credit that we had authorized some time ago that was actually never utilized because I think it was poorly structured, to be honest with you. But a rework of that tax credit that could actually be very beneficial for energy projects across the state is probably an area that could gain some bipartisan support. So I do think there are complete no-goes in some of the governor's proposal, but I think there are probably some areas that that we could work together to move forward.
Representative Fiedler, you get the last word.
I agree. I think that the Reset Board offers us a tremendous ability to work in a bipartisan manner, and I am eager to dig into that as well. I also think that the EDGE tax credit, as Chair Causer mentioned, has a lot of potential, but obviously needs some tweaks to be as effective as possible. And I'm hopeful that community energy, which includes the community solar program, is something that we can work on a bipartisan basis. I think there's a lot there, and I think the governor's plan at its heart is focused on consumers and lowering energy prices, which is certainly a goal for me. Thank you.
We've been speaking with the House Energy Committee chairs, Representatives Elizabeth Fiedler and Martin Causer. Thank you both for your time.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Earlier, PCN spoke with Representative Arvin Venkat about his bill to eliminate Pennsylvanians' medical debt.
Welcome to our program. You're sponsoring a bill that would establish a program to pay off medical debt balances. What does the collections process look like for people who haven't paid off their debt?
So first of all, thank you for having me, Ellen. Medical debt is the leading cause of bankruptcy in the United States, and it really affects so many of our fellow Pennsylvanians. One of the myths about this is that if you have health insurance, you don't have medical debt, and that's not true. With more costs and patient responsibility being thrust upon us by insurance companies and as part of the hospital billing process, a lot of people who have insurance have medical debt. So what generally happens is that someone who has an unpaid medical bill, hospitals or healthcare providers will try to come to an agreement with that individual on an ongoing payment plan. But the reality is that healthcare is very expensive and that there are many people who end up with debt that they simply cannot afford. And in those circumstances, hospitals and healthcare providers have a very difficult choice to make. They can either write off the debt, or they can sell the debt to a debt collector, or they can engage with someone who does debt collection in order to try and pursue payment. And that's where medical debt becomes, an additional burden on top of the burden of healthcare itself.
Under your bill, who is eligible to have their debt paid off?
So as the bill is drafted right now, it would be those who are Pennsylvania residents who have sought health care in Pennsylvania and who are under 400% of the federal poverty level based on either an individual or family characteristic, or who have greater than 5% of their annual income in medical debt. And so that's usually in individuals who have a catastrophic medical event.
Where would the money to pay off their debt come from?
So what we had anticipated and continue to anticipate, and the governor has supported this in previous budget proposals, was that there would be an appropriation from the state. And because distressed medical debt can be purchased for pennies on the dollar, an appropriation as small as $4 million has the potential to relieve up to $400 million in medical debt in Pennsylvania in partnership with hospitals and healthcare providers.
Was there any specific instance where you decided to propose this bill? Anything inspire you?
So I'm a practicing emergency physician, and so I continue to practice. And one of the great things about emergency medicine is you get to see everyone, no questions asked. But you also end up with a circumstance that individuals can sometimes present with issues that really challenge you and reflect the gaps in our society. So the story that I have told is of a patient I had. This was a number of years ago. She presented with back pain and ended up having metastatic breast cancer. And that circumstance is what led me to want to propose this bill, because she had avoided medical care because of the medical debt she had and the lack of insurance that she subsequently had as well. And so this is something that I would love to say that was a unique circumstance, but it's not. And that's the challenge we have.
This bill would also make hospital policies more transparent and accessible. What does your bill say about this?
So this is one of the key things that I think helps all Pennsylvanians. We largely have nonprofit hospitals in Pennsylvania. They're nonprofit and not taxed at a local or state level, with the expectation that they provide benefit to the public. And one of the ways they're obligated to provide that benefit is through charity care programs, highly discounted or free medical care for those who can't afford it. However, those programs are not readily transparent to the public. I'm a practicing emergency physician. I don't always know where to look for this information, and the public certainly doesn't. And so this bill would require hospitals to be transparent about their charity care programs in a standardized and systematic way. And that would also ensure that individuals, our fellow Pennsylvanians who are potentially eligible for charity care, would be able to get assistance with applying for that charity care and would be able to have their bills held in abeyance until that eligibility is determined. So in many ways, I think that is the provision that helps the most Pennsylvanians, while direct medical debt purchasing and relief helps the subset of Pennsylvanians who have medical debt that's in collections.
Where is this bill in the legislative process currently?
So last session, this bill passed the full House. The governor got behind it. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get it across the finish line. Right now, it has been introduced. I'm very proud to have bipartisan co-prime sponsors of this legislation, a number of Republican and Democratic colleagues in the state House. I anticipate that a companion bill will shortly be introduced in the Senate as well. And I do expect that we will see this bill to move forward through the House in the early part of the spring. And then from there, it'll be in discussion with the governor's office and the Senate to see whether we can enact it into law.
Representative Arvin Venkat, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
That concludes today's show. The PCN Capitol Preview returns tomorrow with the House floor leaders, Representative Matt Bradford and Representative Jesse Topper. That's tomorrow morning, live starting at 9 a.m. I'm Francine Schertzer. Thank you for watching.